before Bolivia was Bolivia, and before the Andes knew the sound of liberation. There was Bartolina Sisa, a name etched into the mountains, whispered through generations, and carried by the winds of resistance. She wasn't born in a palace. She didn't sit on a throne, but to her people, she was a queen, a able queen, who dared to challenge the might of the Spanish Empire, and whose spirit still echoes in the heart of every revolutionary who refuses to bow. Bartolina Sisa was born in 1750 in the Aymara village of Caribou, near the shores of Lake Titicaca, in what was then part of the Viceroyalty of Peru. From her earliest days, she witnessed the crushing weight of colonialism. Indigenous people were forced into hard labor under the Meta system, mining silver for the wealth of European kings, while their families starved. The once proud cultures of the Andes were pushed to the margins, their languages silenced, their gods outlawed. But in Bartolina's household, the fire of resistance never went out. Her parents were weavers and traders, and Bartolina followed in their footsteps, traveling through markets, learning the languages of commerce, and more importantly, the pulse of her people. These early journeys connected her with the broader struggles of the indigenous communities across the Andes. She wasn't just a witness to oppression, she became a messenger between regions, a communicator of truth, and eventually a strategist. At a young age, Bartolina married Túpac Katari, another towering figure of indigenous resistance. But this wasn't the story of a man leading and a woman following. No, they were equals. Partners in rebellion, co-commanders of one of the largest indigenous uprisings the Spanish would ever face. Together, they became a force that would shake the colonial order to its core. In 1781, the people had enough, fueled by decades of exploitation, starvation, and cultural erasure. Túpac Katari and Bartolina Sisa mobilized a massive indigenous army, tens of thousands strong, and marched on La Paz. What followed was a siege that would last over 6 months, and it wasn't Túpac Katari alone who led the charge. When he moved to coordinate other regions, it was Bartolina who held the lines. She organized troops, secured supply routes, and oversaw the blockade that starved the colonial capital of its lifeblood. Eyewitnesses said she rode on horseback, her long braids flowing like banners of war. She wore a traditional Aymara dress, not as a relic of the past, but as a symbol of power. Bartolina wasn't just fighting a political battle, she was defending our people's very right to exist. Under her command, the siege cut off Spanish reinforcements, disrupted trade, and brought the colonial administration to its knees. The city trembled, and for a moment, it seemed like the old world might finally fall. But empires don't go quietly. Spanish forces regrouped. Reinforcements arrived, and the siege was broken. Túpac Katari was captured and executed in brutal fashion, his body quartered as a warning to all who might dream of freedom. Bartolina Sisa was soon captured as well, but even in chains, her defiance didn't fade. She was paraded through the streets of La Paz, humiliated, beaten, and tortured. Spanish authorities hoped to break her will, to erase her legacy, to show the indigenous people what happens when they rise. But Bartolina never begged. She never pleaded. On September 5th, 1782, she was publicly executed, strangled with a garrote, and her body just like her partner Túpac Katari. The Spanish hoped her story would die with her, but they failed. In death, Bartolina Sisa became something greater than a general or a rebel. She became a symbol, a myth, a mother of the Andean Revolution. Her name continued to be spoken in secret, passed from elder to child, encoded in songs, rituals, and resistance. Today, Bartolina Sisa is remembered as one of the most important indigenous heroines in Latin American history. Her face appears in murals, statues, and street art across Bolivia and beyond. She's not just a historical figure, she's a spiritual ancestor to the movements that still fight for indigenous rights, land sovereignty, and cultural survival. In 1983, the Bartolina Sisa National Confederation of Campesino, Indigenous, and Native Women of Bolivia was founded honoring her name, her struggle, and her legacy. This organization has played a critical role in mobilizing women, advocating for land reform, and pushing for political representation in a country that has long tried to silence its indigenous voices. Every year on September 5th, Bolivia now observes the Day of the Indigenous Woman in honor of Bartolina Sisa. Her legacy isn't buried in dusty archives, lives on in protests, community organizing, and national memory. And yet, her story is still not taught in most schools across the Americas. Her name doesn't appear in many textbooks. She doesn't get Hollywood movies or global headlines. But that's exactly why we tell these stories. That's exactly why her voice matters. Because Bartolina Sisa wasn't just a rebel or a warrior. She was a vision of what indigenous womanhood could be: powerful, unyielding, and rooted in love for her people. She dared to say no to empire, no to erasure, no to silence. And she paid with her life. But in doing so, she became eternal. We tell her story not just to honor the past, but to fuel the future. Because as long as there are those who remember her name, Bartolina Sisa rides again. Through the mountains of Bolivia, through the voices of the oppressed, through the rising fire of justice. She is not gone. She is millions, and she is still